First of all, I'd like to thank the Kidney March folks for giving us the opportunity to, as an independent retailer, be involved with the Kidney March for 2020. And they approached me with the idea of offering some form of a information session, the importance of gear, footwear, and some other things that can hopefully help you out with hopefully making your training and preparation and the day of the 3 days of Kidney March as comfortable as possible. And where Gord's running store comes into somewhat relevant info for you is we have a fair bit of experience. Myself, I have experience with some ultra distance running. We also help out other marathon groups with their training and their gear preparation as they go from mile 0 to the number of miles you put in at the end of or conclusion of the Kidney March itself. With that being said, we also get a number of participants who take part in the Camino walks over in Spain, where they do any number of these various spokes. And those marches or walks can be up to 850, 900 kilometers in length, where they go from one day to the next. So hopefully I can give you enough information today through this means of a video that will help you feel much more comfortable, more at ease when you come to the big wall of shoes that you see behind me, or if you approach any of your independent retailers or local shoe stores in your neighborhood, because I realize that there's a lot of people across this country that are training for this Kidney March. So first of all, when people come in to the store, I want to try to explain to them why would they go to a running shoe and not a walking shoe. There are some things with walking shoes that are a little bit flatter in profile. They typically have a bit more of a harder leather upper, and they're meant for some walking, standing, and they're also, a lot of cases, aesthetically, they're used in a situation where people might want to use the shoe as their casual shoe throughout the day. When you're putting in mile after mile in a training program, there's a lot of functional features with the good old running shoe, the long distance running shoe, that will prove to be a little bit more to your advantage. When I pull up one shoe off the wall, first of all, the shoe's cushioning material under the sole is meant for long distance running and mileage, so they're more durable. They're also fairly soft and cushioning. They naturally have this upturned toe, which you'll see or hear people refer to as a rocker sole. That rocker sole just allows the foot to roll forward more fluidly, a little bit more easily. So it's not going to hinder your foot strike in any way, shape, or form. A lot of people, when they walk and or they run, they typically heel strike on the outside edge of their heel. Their foot comes down in mid-stance, and then they toe off and go forward. And that typical motion, referred to as heel, mid-stance and toeing off, is commonly referred to as a normal pronating type foot. And when I say pronating, some people say, oh, did he just curse at me or call me a bad name? No, the pronation is basically your lower body's mechanics method dispersing shock. When your foot comes down to heel strike, the Achilles tendon gets a fair bit of shock that goes up the Achilles and into your calf of your lower leg. And then as your foot comes down in the mid-stance phase, then it sends the shock waves through the ligaments and tendons and the muscles of your foot as well. Now that you're in the mid-stance phase, everything starts to contract and tighten up, and then you toe off. Now, when a person has normal pronation, their foot goes from heel strike to mid-stance and toeing off in a nice, smooth, straight fashion. Most of the shoes on the wall will work, with a few exceptions of shoes that are meant for the foot that heel strikes on the outside, comes down at mid-stance and goes in a little bit extra to the inside. Then you'll go to a shoe that has a little bit more firmness. I'll grab one of those off the wall. I'll use this one as an example. the inside edge of the shoe is a much firmer material on the inside. So the person will still heel strike on the outside, that foot being, the midsole being firmer on the inside. It'll keep the lower leg straighter. So over time, they're not going in an excessive sort of way. They're not putting stress on the lower part of the inside of their leg or the inside of their knee from that perspective. So there are some people, yes, even though they're walking, yes, they're not hitting with the same impact type forces as they are when they run, but if they keep doing this repeatedly, their shoe collapses in so much, we would encourage them to try to look for a shoe that has some element of stability for that foot. We'll get one type of customer, or I shouldn't say one type, we'll get a few types of customers who come in and they say, well, I heel strike on the outside, but I stay on the outside. I don't really have that mechanism to allow my foot to come in and pronate normally. So that type of foot would be referred to as a supinating foot. And the supinating foot, if we were to take a look at it structurally, you'd probably have a really high arch, and if I tried to flex it and move it side to side, it would be referred to as a very rigid foot. Now, some people say, well, so they're going to get a shoe that has a hard density in the outside. On paper, it sounds good, but in reality, there's about 3% of the population of the world who actually do truly supinate. And then out of that percentage, there's even a smaller number that take up the sport of distance running. So the shoe manufacturers say, sorry, we're not going to make a shoe in the reverse of this one with that hard density put over here for them. So what is that person to do? We find one of two things. First of all, they go to a shoe that has as much cushion as they possibly can, so that the midsole of the shoe gives them the cushioning, because their mechanics don't have the ability to transfer the shock through the ligaments and tendons like the pronating foot does. So, and then the other thing they're looking for, if they know to ask for a shoe that has as much curve as possible. The shoes that have more curve, that encourages the foot to roll and forces it to pronate a little bit, so that the shoe will encourage your mechanics to disperse some of that shock. There is another type or category of shoes that are on the market. They're trying to, in 2006, that was the time when the Vibram 5-finger shoes came out, like the barefoot shoes. And the big thing that did was recognize that there are some people who don't heel strike when they walk and when they run. And so what they did is they came up with these minimal type shoes with very little midsole at all. And the shoe manufacturers at the time thought, well, it's just going to be a fad that's going to pass in a couple months' time. Well, now many years later, it's not a fad. The good thing I found from it is it recognized that there are some people who do heel strike, and there are some people who come down more forefoot. And the people who come down forefoot, they don't have the rotational forces that disperse the shock as I've demonstrated in the pronating type foot. They get a shock absorption through their ankle joint. When they come down mid-stance, their ankle joint turns as shock. Their knee is another shock absorber, and a little bit in their hip. So they create the same forces, but it disperses it over the upper portion of their leg, not their lower portion of the leg. And now I'm showing you a shoe, the brand, this one is Hoka. Despite its really thick sole, it is a lower, what I coin is a lower drop shoe. Its heel is lower to the ground relative to the forefoot as compared to this shoe. This shoe would be 12 millimeters up in the heel down to your forefoot. This one is 4 millimeters from the heel down to your forefoot. And that lower heel drop is a little bit more complementary to that midfoot type stride. So we'll get a few people say, well, when can I go to that type of a shoe, or when should I go to the traditional type shoe? So a lot would depend on looking at the wear pattern of your old shoes and seeing how it's breaking down, and that would help the salespeople guide you more correctly, rightly, to the shoe that hopefully would work more comfortably for you. So there are a few things. So that's a quick nutshell as far as the mechanics of why you go to some shoes. I do have some purchasing points as far as the things to keep in mind when people are looking for shoes from that perspective. First of all, fit your shoes later in the day because your feet will swell up. When you're walking up to 100 kilometers over 3 days, you're doing some fairly lengthy time frames on your feet. Your feet will naturally swell. So we want you to fit your shoes later in the day when your feet are at the max. Taking your old shoes, we appreciate it immensely when people bring in their old shoes. We're looking for things for the wear pattern. If we know the mechanics of the shoe, this is a neutral cushion shoe for the normal pronating foot. We're going to look at it from behind to see if it's been working well. Ideally, if a worn out shoe is doing what it's supposed to mechanically for you, it should be reasonably straight. If it has a tendency to look like it's leaning in or leaning out, then mechanically something about that shoe didn't work. The other thing we like to do is turn the shoes over and we'll squeeze them at the ball of the foot area to see if the shoe is worn out. Now the one I'm going to show you in my hand, yes, a person did actually wear this shoe out. They wore a hole clear through the shoe, but mechanically the shoe worked well. It was a couple springs ago and she was complaining of her feet getting wet when she walked through the puddles, and she couldn't understand why because the puddles were just a skip of water. When she took her orthotic out of the shoe, she was quite surprised that she wore a hole straight through the sole. So hopefully none of you have worn a shoe to this state. But another example, this shoe here, when we set it on the counter, you can see it does have a little bit of lean inwards. So this person would be more advised or better advised to go to a shoe that had some element of stability to it. So despite the wear on your shoes, the more wear the better from a mechanical perspective to help the salespeople out. That's a big plus when you can do that. So wear the socks that you'd normally use when you're going into the store. If you're apt to wear really thin socks, and those are your favorite socks, then you know the shoe's going to fit truly that way. But if you're apt to wear a really heavy sock, you don't have it with you when you come into the store. We do have some try-on socks. Hopefully that we have something that could work if you don't have it. But to remove that doubt, bring in your own socks. That helps a lot. If you're anticipate using the shoes for a longer period of time, a half hour or more, make sure you have adequate toe room. When you're standing on the shoes, you should be able to wiggle your toes fairly freely. The thing here is walking some distances and you're going down some steep descents, you can find your toes might jam at the end of the toe box, and that could cause some toenail issues, force you to stop sooner than you want to take care of them. The shoe should feel comfortable initially. When you're walking on the shoes, I liken it to walking around your stocking feet. It shouldn't feel like the shoe is throwing your foot this way or that way or aggressively throwing your foot down. It should roll from heel strike to toeing off reasonably smoothly. The shoes should not feel like they're pushing in or pushing you out. The heel can lift slightly in the back end. If it's moving a little bit too much and everything else about the shoe feels fine, we might show you what's called a lace lock. It's just a method of tying the shoe in the back end that helps hold your heel a little bit more securely. The only word of caution with the lace lock, if you pull it too tightly, it can put a lot of pressure on your instep right where the laces would tie. So again, there's a number of things we can do with the lacing to make one shoe fit differently compared to the other. Go to a store that recommends more than one pair of shoes. Unless your foot is a women's size 5, 5.5, or in the other extreme, one of the larger sizes of the size selection, then you might be limited with less than 3 or more choices. But the reality is, a shoe that you like today, the fit of, it may not fit and feel as well when they come out with a new replacement model. So it's nice to know that there were a few other models that were close and feel just as well and maybe work even better than what your old tried and true shoe was. The other thing, if possible, run, walk, use the shoes for what their intended purpose is. we encourage people to try the shoes out. If they're a little bit doubtful, just keep the shoes clean. And if your person has a problem, they can bring them back, exchange, credit, refund, whatever. Make sure where you go to look for your shoes have some sort of a similar policy, because a lot of times they can feel really good just walking around the store until you actually get out there and start doing the activity that you're planning to use the shoes for. That's when you want to make sure that the shoes are comfortable and working well. And finally, if you're unsure about anything, make sure you ask questions. If the individual at the store is not able to answer the question for you, hopefully they can get somebody who can answer the question. One question some people will ask, or a couple questions some people ask, one is, how long should I get out of my pair of shoes? Most people training from today through to the Kidney March in September, I would anticipate most people should get away with one pair fairly comfortably. Things that will break down the shoes faster would be if you're walking on successive days, one after the other, think of the shoe's midsole, that's the cushioning portion of the shoe that's under your foot, as a big sponge. When you're using that shoe for your workout and walking around day to day, that sponge gets partially compressed. When your foot is not in that shoe, it needs 24 to 48 hours to recuperate and get back to its original shape. So if you're walking on the shoe for your workout first thing in the morning, and then you keep the shoe on, wear it, that's a partially compressed sponge. You take the shoes off at night, they're sitting at the back door, and needs at least 24 to 48 hours to recuperate back to its original shape. So again, if you're wearing the shoe the next day, you might wear the shoe out a little bit faster than if you had a shoe that you can alternate with from that perspective. If you use one shoe and you're not sure when it's worn out, the two things I like people to be aware of, at the ball of the foot, as I showed with the other shoe that had the hole in it, that's where the shoe starts to wear its thinnest point. If you're walking over the sidewalk and you step on a crack or a few pebbles, and you can feel that crack or those pebbles through the underside of the shoe on the underside of your foot, that's a good physical clue saying, okay, the cushioning properties of the shoes might be time to consider new shoes. The second thing you can look at is that heel cup at the back. The heel cup is what holds and supports your heel right at heel strike or at mid stance. If that heel cup is no longer sitting straight, if the shoe has a pronounced lean inwards or outwards, then the mechanics of the shoe for the workouts of 40 minutes or more from a walking perspective may start to do some lower leg damage that you don't really want to have to plan for. So those are the things that I would suggest that you're looking for to help determine how long the shoe should last for you. I tell people they usually get about 650 to about 800 miles of use. So kilometer-wise, you're looking just over 1,000 to about 1,250 kilometers approximately out of a pair of shoes. So hopefully that helps. And from a shoe perspective,